Adaeze slapped her husband's hand away from her face, not out of anger, out of something worse, exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after 10 years of hoping and being disappointed so many times that hope itself starts to feel like a lie you keep telling yourself. Tobena's hand froze in the air between them, hovering there like he didn't know where to put it anymore. That was the truth of their marriage now. Neither of them knew where to put anything. Not their hands, not their words, not the grief they had stopped naming out loud. "I'm fine," Adaeze said. She walked to the window. Outside, the compound was already buzzing. It was Sunday, the worst day of the week. If you are watching this story for the first time, do yourself a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this kind of story does not come twice. Now let's go. She had Ngozi before she saw her. That laugh, thick and deliberate, designed to fill every corner of a room and remind everyone inside it who owned the space. Adaeze straightened her wrapper, pressed her palms flat against her stomach, the way she always did when she needed to steady herself, and walked out of the door. Ngozi was standing at the center of the compound in a red and gold Ankara, her gele sitting so high it looked like a second head. She had her phone out, showing photographs to 3 women who leaned in like they were looking at a miracle. "Ebuka just got promoted again," Ngozi announced, loud enough for the entire compound to hear, loud enough for God himself to take notes. And Somto, my son To, they made him head of accounts. Head at 32 years old. She pressed her chest dramatically. This is what it means to raise children. You suffer, you water the ground, and then the ground blesses you back. She turned then, slowly, deliberately, and her eyes landed on Adaeze. "Adaeze," she said it like a greeting, but it was never a greeting. "You look so fresh today. No children to chase, no noise to manage. You people that rest, you rest well, oh." The laughter that followed came from 3 directions. Adaeze did not move. She smiled the way a woman smiles when she has decided that tears are too expensive. "God is not finished with me," Adaeze said quietly. Ngozi tilted her head. 10 years and God is still working. Okay, we are waiting with you." More laughter. Tobana appeared at Adaeze's side then, his hand finding the small of her back. But it was not a rescue. It was more like a man steadying himself by leaning on a wall. They stood together, which is different from standing for each other. Lolo Adaku came out of her room at the far end of the compound. She was a small woman, small and dense, the way stones are small and dense. She looked at Adaeze the way a farmer looks at soil he has already decided is useless. She did not say good afternoon. She walked past, said something to Ngozi in Igbo, and went inside. Adaeze had learnt what Lulu Adaku had said 2 years into the marriage. Her husband's cousin had whispered it to her like it was a gift. She says, "A woman who cannot give a man children is like a farm that cannot give crops, and nobody keeps a farm that gives nothing." That night, Tobena sat on the edge of the bed with his back to her. Adaeze watched the curve of his shoulders, the way they carried a weight he never spoke about. She reached out and put her hand on his back. He did not pull away. He also did not turn. "Talk to me," she said. "I don't know what to say." "Say anything." Silence, the kind that has its own sound. Then he said it. He said it carefully, the way you carry something fragile you are not sure you should be carrying. "My mother spoke to me this week. She mentioned Isioma, the woman she has been..." She stopped, started again. "She said it is not about replacing you. She said tradition..." "Stop." Adaeze's voice was not loud. It was not even hard. It was just done. "I heard you." She stood. She went to the side of the bed and she knelt. Not because she was weak, because she was finally ready to give the whole thing to someone stronger. She pressed her forehead against the mattress and she whispered into the fabric, "God, I have tried everything I know how to try. I am tired of fighting this by myself. If you are there, if you see me, then do what only you can do. I am not going to beg anymore. I am just going to trust you. Whatever you want to do, do it. I am yours." She stayed there for a long time. Tobena did not come to check on her, but at some point in the night, she felt the mattress shift, and then his arms were around her from behind, and his lips were pressed against the back of her neck, and he was not saying anything. He was just holding on. She turned in his arms and found his face in the dark, and she kissed him. Not the kind of kiss that asks for something, the kind that says, "I am still here. We are still here. Whatever comes, I have not left you." He held her face in both hands and kissed her back like a man who had remembered something important. 3 months later, Adaeze sat in a white plastic chair across from a doctor who slid a scan across the desk with the quietest smile. She looked at the image. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the word the doctor had circled twice. Twins. Drop a comment below. Are you already hooked? Let us keep going. Adaeze did not cry the way she had always imagined she would. She had rehearsed that moment in her mind so many times across 10 years. The hospital visit where the news was finally good, the scan that meant something different from all the other scans. In her imagination, she wept loudly, dramatically, and the nurses clapped. But in the room that day, she just sat very still and let the image blur and refocus in front of her eyes until the realization landed fully. One boy, one girl, both alive, both already curled into each other like they always knew they were not alone. "Are you all right?" the doctor asked. Adaeze looked up. A single tear moved down her cheek. She said, "I have never been more all right in my life." Then she whispered, so quietly the doctor almost missed it, "God, you did not forget me." She drove home with the scan folded in her hand. She sat in the car outside her gate for 11 minutes. She was not ready to go inside yet. She needed to feel this alone for just a little longer before it became something that belonged to the world. When she went inside, Tobena was in the kitchen. He turned when she heard her footsteps, took one look at her face, the red around her eyes, the way she was pressing her lips together, and crossed the room. "What happened? Are you okay? Adaeze, what happened?" She held out the scan. He took it. He looked at it. His brow came together, then apart, then together again, as he read the notes at the bottom. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. He looked up at her. "Adaeze?" "Two," she whispered. "There are 2 of them." Tobena sat down heavily on the kitchen chair. He pressed the scan flat against his chest like he was trying to feel a heartbeat through it. His shoulders dropped, then they shook. And the man who had said nothing for months, who had sat at the edge of beds and looked at walls and carried silence like a second body, put his face in his hands and wept like a boy. "I'm sorry," he said between breaths. "I'm sorry I let them get into my head. I'm sorry I almost..." He stopped, started again. "I'm sorry." Adaeze knelt forward in front of him. She took his face in both hands the way he had taken hers that night, and she made him look at her. "We do not talk about the almost. We only talk about what is." She kissed him slowly, his forehead, both cheeks, then his mouth. He pulled her close and held on. They made a pact that night. No one would know. Not his mother, not Ngozi, not any person in that compound or anywhere near it. They would carry this together, just the 2 of them, until God decided it was time for the world to see. The weeks moved. Adaeze wore boo-boo-boos and loose dresses. She moved carefully and cited a bad back whenever anyone asked why she was walking slowly. She came to the compound every Sunday and sat through Ngozi's announcements and Lolo Adaku's silences, and she smiled her quiet smile and said nothing. Ngozi was in full glory during this season. Ebuka and Somto had apparently been placed on a special company project, something with large contracts, Ngozi said vaguely, her chest wide with pride. She threw smaller gatherings at her house in the weeks building up to what she called the big celebration.
She had hired a hall. She had hired a caterer. She had told everyone within 10 kilometers that she was throwing a party for her son's achievements because that was what real mothers did. They celebrated their children. One Sunday, she looked across the compound at Adaeze and said, "You should come, oh. Come and see what God does for women who give their husbands children. Maybe you will learn something." Adaeze looked at her steadily. She said, "God sees everything, Ngozi." Ngozi laughed. "He is seeing my son's promotions. What is he seeing for you?" Adaeze just smiled and looked away. The day of the party came. Ngozi's compound was transformed. A canopy stretched across the entire yard, tables covered in white cloth, a hired MC walking around with a microphone testing it. Lolo Adaku sat in the best chair at the front in a purple and silver Iro and Buba, her chin raised. She looked like a queen, which is what she believed herself to be. Adaeze came with Tobena. She wore a wide yellow bubu that moved around her like a small tent. Nobody looked at her long enough to notice the shape beneath it. They were all watching Ngozi, who was directing caterers and greeting guests with the energy of someone who had been waiting her whole life to stand in the center of something this large. "My sons are coming at 3, Ngozi announced for the first time. "Ebuka and Somto, when they walk in here, you will see what a mother's sacrifice looks like." 3 o'clock came, then 3:15. Then 3:30. Ngozi's phone rang. She stepped away, came back. Her smile had changed, not gone entirely, but thinned at the edges like paper that had been wet. Her phone rang again. She stepped away again. This time, she was gone for 7 minutes. When she came back, she was not smiling at all. The MC was telling a joke into the microphone. Someone laughed, someone clinked a glass. The party was still moving, unaware that something beneath it had shifted. Then Ngozi sat down, just sat, straight down into a chair nobody had brought to her, a chair that happened to be there, and she stared at nothing. One of the women near her leaned over. "Ngozi, what happened? Are the boys on their way?" Ngozi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The whisper started at the edges of the canopy and moved inward like a slow fire. Someone had received a message. Someone else confirmed it. A third person showed their phone screen to a fourth. Ebuka and Somto had been arrested that afternoon. Theft from company accounts, not a small amount, the kind of amount that ended careers and opened courtrooms. It was already online. There were photographs. The MC's joke ended. The laughter faded. Someone's glass was set down very quietly. Ngozi did not move. She sat in her beautiful Ankara with her perfectly tied gele in a compound full of food nobody was eating anymore, and she stared at the tablecloth in front of her as if it contained some kind of answer. Lolo Adaku stood slowly. Her face said nothing. She walked away from the party into the main house and closed the door behind her. Adaeze watched all of it. She did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and more solemn, the particular weight of watching pride collapse and knowing that she had once prayed to simply survive it. Then she felt something else, a sharp, low pressure, a warmth spreading. She reached for Tobena's arm and gripped it. "Tobena," she said very calmly, "my water just broke." Tobena looked at her, looked down, looked back at her face. "Right now?" "Right now." They moved quickly and quietly, which was the way Adaeze had done everything for 10 years. Nobody noticed them leave. The party was too busy dying its own death to pay attention to a couple walking steadily toward the gate. Amara, their neighbor's 17-year-old daughter who had been helping in the kitchen that morning, appeared from nowhere at the sight of Adaeze's face. "Auntie, are you okay?" "Call Tobena's phone if anything happens at the house. Otherwise, pray." Adaeze took one step and then stopped. A contraction rolled through her like a wave, long and deep and completely indifferent to everything happening around it. She breathed. She straightened. "Let's go," she said. The drive to the hospital was 12 minutes. Tobena drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand stretched back, holding hers across the gear. He was talking. She could see his lips moving, but she was somewhere else entirely, in that deep internal country that opens up when a body is doing something ancient and enormous. She squeezed his hand through each wave. He squeezed back. They wheeled her in. The doors closed. Tobena stood in the corridor with his hands pressed flat together in front of his mouth, like a man praying through his own palms. He did not know how Lolo Adaku found out. He did not know who called her or how she got there. But 20 minutes after they arrived, she appeared at the end of the corridor in her party clothes, the purple and silver still on, the gele now slightly askew, and she walked toward him. She sat down on the plastic bench beside him without a word. They did not speak. They just waited. The waiting was 40 minutes long, or maybe 2 hours. Tobena would not be able to say later. Time in those corridors does not move the way normal time does. A nurse came out smiling before she had finished opening the door. Congratulations, twin babies, a boy and a girl. Mother is fine, babies are strong. Tobena made a sound that was not a word. It came from somewhere below language. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth and looked at the ceiling, and his whole body shook at once with something that had been trapped in him for a decade. Beside him, Lolo Adaku made no sound at all. But when Tobena turned to look at her, she had both hands over her face and her shoulders were moving. This woman who had not cried publicly in as long as anyone could remember, who had reduced Adaeze to dry ground with the same flat voice she might use to describe the weather, she was sitting on a plastic hospital bench in a crumpled party outfit, weeping. They let Tobena in first. He walked to the bed and saw his wife holding 2 small bundled things, one in each arm, and she looked up at him with the face of a woman who had always known this was coming, even on the days she could not feel it. He sat beside her. He took her face in his hands and pressed his forehead against hers and stayed there, breathing her breath. "You held on," he said. "We held on," she corrected. He kissed her, slow, deliberate, full of everything the last 10 years had cost them and everything the next 40 would give back. Then he looked at his son, then at his daughter, and he could not speak for a long time. When Lolo Adaku came in, she paused at the door. She looked smaller than she had ever looked. The gele was gone now, her hair wrapped simply beneath a cloth. She walked to the bed and she looked at the babies, and something in her face moved, cracked open really, like a wall that has finally received too much rain. She knelt beside the bed. A woman of her age, with her pride, with her history, she knelt on the hospital floor beside her daughter-in-law's bed, and she took Adaeze's hand in both of hers. "Nwami, my child," she said, "I called you dry ground. I told my son to find someone else. I sat in your home and I watched you suffer, and I believed things about you that were not true." Her voice broke. She pressed Adaeze's hand to her lips. "I am ashamed."
I do not know if you can forgive an old woman who was wrong. The room was very quiet. Adaeze looked at her for a long moment. Then she shifted her daughter, small and warm and smelling of newness, into the crook of one arm, and with her free hand she reached down and held Lolo Adaku's. "Mama," she said, "I forgave you a long time ago. I just needed God to finish what He started before the words could mean something." Lolo Adaku pressed her forehead to their joined hands and wept the way old women weep when something they broke has been mended beyond what they deserve. And Adaeze let her. Because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, but it is much lighter to carry. The news moved through the compound the way news in compounds always does, from phone to mouth to gate to street. Adaeze had delivered twins, a boy and a girl, both healthy. The woman they had called dry ground had brought forth 2. The woman they had mocked on Sundays, the woman Ngozi had spoken over like a sentence. By the time Adaeze came home 3 days later, wrapped and radiant and holding one child while Tobena held the other, the compound had rearranged itself.
Chairs had been brought out. Food appeared from 3 different kitchens. Women who had laughed along with Ngozi came with cloth and gifts and voices full of celebration, because that is also what compound do. They absorb miracles into the story they tell about themselves, as if they were always on the right side of it. Adaeze received all of it graciously. She shook hands. She let them admire her children. She smiled. But her smile was not for them. It was for the version of herself she was on that bedroom floor with her face in a mattress, surrendering the one thing she had held on to the longest. It was for the version of herself who had chosen faith when the evidence said otherwise, who had kept quiet when silence was the only dignified option, who kissed her husband in the dark not because things were good, but because love is not contingent on good. Ngozi did not come. Nobody spoke about her. Nobody mentioned Ibuka or Somto. The compound had decided, the way compounds decide things, that the story of this day belonged entirely to Adaeze. And in that, at least, they had finally gotten something right. Tobena found Adaeze that late evening, sitting alone on the veranda with both babies asleep in the cot beside her. He brought her a cup of tea and sat close, his shoulder against hers. The compound was quiet. The sky above the zinc rooftops was the color of a mango at its last stage of ripeness, orange and deep and full. She leaned her head against him. He kissed the top of her head and held it. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to prove and nothing left to grieve, and in the silence between 2 people who survived something together, that is more than enough. She looked at her children, this boy, this girl, these 2 small people who had come from a body everyone had written off, and she felt nothing as grand as victory. She felt something more like grace, the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that was there even when she could not feel it, working in ways she could not see, timing things she could not control, holding together a story that looked from the outside like it was ending. It was not ending. It was only ever beginning. And that is the story of Adaeze, a woman who refused to let the noise of the world drown out the voice she was waiting to hear. If this story moved you, if you felt it somewhere real, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Leave a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We want to know. Drop your country or your city right there in the comments. We read every single one. God bless you, and we will see you in the next one.